It's really brilliant to have you with us this morning. We've been really overwhelmed and impressed with how many people have showed an interest in this session this morning, and we're delighted to share the work that's been done. So hopefully you're here to hear about the future of digital advocacy. We're co-hosting this event today with More Onion, Impact Stack, and the Sheila McKechnie Foundation, also known as SMK. And also acknowledge the fact we've got people outside of the UK. So if it's not morning where you are, whatever time zone, you're really welcome this morning to be joining us. So my name's Katie Roberts. I'm the CEO of SMK. A little bit more about that in a minute. More Onion, if you've not come across them before, are a digital mobilisation agency, real experts in this area, and the makers of campaigning and fundraising software Impact Stack, which many of you may have used. So we're really happy to partner with them today to welcome you to this event, and we'll hear the results of their research, which again, some of you may have taken part in, and to open up some discussions about what's working, but also what's not working and how we can learn from each other in the area of digital advocacy. So for those of you who've not come across SMK before, so we are a charity that exists to support campaigners and change makers across the UK. We're just 20 years old, so we've been around for a little bit, and we champion the amazing work, the relentless, the tireless work, and the creative work that campaigners do, particularly through things like our National Campaigner Awards. We also defend the right to speak out. And a large part of what we do is connecting people within the community through our newsletter, through blogs, events like this one, and also our campaign survey, so that we can do this, learn from each other, support each other, show up and see how large our community is and how brilliant it is. And we also support both individuals and organizations through our free resources on our website, but also through our training program and our consultancy work. And I want to give you just a tiny taster of some of our other training events coming up in the next couple of months. And you'll receive all the links to this, so you don't need to scribble it down right now. These are all online. They have got a UK focus, but they're open to anyone. They last 3 hours, and they're led by experienced campaigners who have tried and tested approaches to share. There are also different price options for individuals or different size organisations, but please do have a look to find out a little bit more on our website, or get in touch to see if we can tailor any support to what your organisation needs. So here is how today's event is going to run. So we've got two main sections today. For part one, we'll be using this Zoom webinar, which is where you've all safely landed so far. So that means, because we're in the webinar format, your mic and your video are disabled, but that doesn't mean you don't have a voice. The chat function is open, so lots of you have already used that already. You can share comments, weather reports, and thoughts throughout, and we'll share those relevant links and additional information as they come up. We're also intending to share afterwards as well, so if you don't get a chance to quickly grab things, there'll be a second chance. So we're going to kick off the webinar with 3 presentations to give you some food for thought, and particularly for the second half, where we're going to go into some more discussions. This bit is going to be recorded, and we'll share that recording with everyone who's signed up. We've mentioned the chat function. We also have Q&A in Zoom as well, which you'll see on the Zoom controls at the bottom of your screen. So if you have a specific question that you'd like someone to ask, either to the whole or a particular person, please can you put it in the Q&A rather than the chat, because it makes it a lot easier for us as hosts to manage and make sure that we come back to you. We'll take as many as we can at the end of each presentation, and the speakers will answer others if they can as well too. So that's part one that we're going to lead you through. The second part starts at 11:15, and this will be a much more interactive space, because we're going to be hosting discussion groups. So there will actually be separate Zoom meetings. So we won't be a big community anymore. We'll be split up into different themes. And then you'll be able to be on camera and talk. You don't have to if you're still in your pajamas, but we'd really encourage, because it's really encouraging to see each other's faces and expressions and reactions. So these will be Zoom meetings, and we'll talk you through how to pick your group at the end of the webinar. So that's all the instructions I'm going to give you for now. And I'm delighted to hand over to our first speaker, Jess Day. Jess has been working in digital campaigning over 20 years. She's also proved to be a credible event organizer today. She's been at More Onion for 9 of those and is also one of SMK's associates. So you may have met her on a training course, and she delivers our digital campaigning and mass mobilization training module. Over to you, Jess. Thank you very much.
Jess also needs to find the unmute button. So thank you, Katie. And can I just get a wave? Bella, I can still see you. My slides are still displaying okay. Cool, thank you. Cool, so as Katie has introduced, I'm Jess, and I'm going to be presenting some research that we've done at More Onion. So I work for More Onion. We have a platform called Impact Stack, many of you will know. It was one of the first mobilization platforms to offer email to target functionality. Our clients use it to run campaigning, fundraising, and engagement actions, and to collect data and flow it where they need it to go. So we've been really proud to support many clients over the last 10 years to advance them to win their campaign, to build their supporter base, but we know that we can't stand still. So we're in the process of releasing a new and upgraded version of our software, but we saw this was a good moment to rethink the advocacy toolset as we were rebuilding it, and to ask some hard questions about, what digital campaigning needs to look like in 2025. So we decided to do some research, and this is what we've done. We ran a campaigner survey. 115 people took part, over 100 of them from non-profit organisations, and many thanks to you if you're here today. So we asked questions about how organisations are using digital actions to mobilise supporters around their campaigns, what they thought was working and what could be better. Our inbox analysis signed up to organisational email lists to look from the other end of what people were being asked to do. And we also spoke to people who were on the receiving end of digital campaigning. So we spoke to one MP, 3 parliamentary staffers who are the ones who are really hands-on dealing with incoming correspondence, and also one person who works for a member of the Senedd, so that's the Welsh Parliament in the devolved nation. So to caveat everything I'm going to say, we acknowledge these are small numbers relative to the sheer volume of campaigning that's going on. So it would be rash to draw some very hard conclusions from what we looked at, but there's lots here to give us plenty of food for thought. The inbox analysis focused specifically on UK organisations. We've spoken to UK parliamentarians, and just over 80% of the survey respondents were in the UK. So some of the findings won't transfer to other contexts, but we hope that for those of you who are based outside the UK or campaigning outside the UK, we hope there's useful information for you here too. So just to kind of summarize the top line, email is very much alive as a campaign tool, but we think we need to be making better use of it and think more creatively about how to involve supporters in our campaigns. So a majority of our survey respondents, so 77% agreed or strongly agreed that it's getting harder to get a target's attention via email, but only half of them agreed that MPs are less likely to respond than before, and only about a third agreed that supporters were less likely to take these actions. So that kind of activity does seem to be robust. And admittedly, it's a self-selecting group, but all of the MP and office staff we spoke to said they really valued email from constituents, and they clearly took seriously the responsibility to engage with it and respond. And then there'll be more on this later. So first thing that we found, so email to target is the most widely used digital tactic. I started this research with the hypothesis that email to target was perhaps being overused, and in the UK, perhaps particularly email to MP, but I was quite surprised by this. We tend to think of email to target as a relatively high bar action, but in our survey, 85% of organisations had done at least one email to target in the last year, and fewer had run one petition. I wasn't expecting that. And similarly, in the inbox analysis, we looked at the calls to action sent out to organisations' mailing lists across a 3-month period. And 66% of the digital advocacy actions offered were email to target actions. So we were surprised by this. So we looked at a cross-section of newly created actions on our own Impact Stack platform over a similar period. 46% of the actions were emailed to target, with petitions, hand raises, and open letters. So these kind of lower bar actions accounting for just under a third combined. The rest were a mixture of quizzes, order forms, sign-up forms, surveys, message exchange, and pledges. But again, email to target very firmly the biggest cohort. Contact to target, and we in the survey we defined this more broadly than just email, but they were mostly emails. Contact to target actions were also more frequent as well as more widespread. So 41% of organisations said they'd run 4 or more contact to target actions in the year, and they were mostly email. 12% had run a contact to target action, but no petitions or hand raisers. And again, that I thought that was surprising. Social platforms. So while social platforms like Twitter became very influential in journalism and political circles, the recent changes have shown the risks of relying on a third-party platform for access either to an audience or to a campaign target. So while consolidation and technical changes are affecting email too, it remains a channel where campaigners can build an audience without the risk of losing it in a sweep of the algorithm, and can access decision makers. Again, there's more on this in the report. We also, because we'd asked about contacting targets, respondents told us about other ways that they had gathered supporter energy and directed it at a target. So physical media may be slower and more expensive, but there's clearly still real value in something tangible. So 29% had asked supporters to write a letter or a postcard, and there were 38% of collected messages for a target to deliver another way. There are some examples in the report from collecting messages and presenting them as a book, displaying them on an ad van, or even a hand embroidered message in one case. So who are the targets? We asked who organisations were targeting with their actions, and we can see immediately the parliamentarians dominate. This chart shows the actual numbers in the responses, but looking at it as percentages, 82% of organisations who would run a targeted actions had targeted MPs or equivalent. 46% had targeted a government minister. Had run an action targeting MPs, and 72% of email to target actions in our inbox analysis were targeting MPs. It does make you reflect on what it must be like to be on the receiving end of all this, and Stefan's going to dig a little bit more into that. It also leads me to question, is contact with an MP really the right route to change in every single one of these cases? Stefan will have more to say about MPs, and one of our discussion groups will focus on them, but I wanted to raise a narrow technical point here. So one thing that all of the MP and MS office raised was the email format really matters. So briefly, to comply with anti-spam regulations, Impact Stack creates a unique sender address for each supporter email so that the email is sent from a domain that our servers are authorized to send from. And replies from the target are mapped onto the supporter's email address and forwarded on automatically in the back end. So our interviewees all flagged up that systems that send the email from an authorized sender address but include the supporter's email address as a reply to are causing some problems for them. The systems used in MPs' offices to process incoming mail can't interact with those reply to addresses, making it harder and sometimes impossible for them to reply to supporters. There's more detail on that in the report. So what makes a good email to target action? So there's a lot of them out there. Encouragingly, the responses from the survey matched what we heard from the interviews with targets. They showed a high level of agreement between campaigners and campaign recipients about what mattered. A clear call to action for the target, personalization by the sender, and tailoring to the target. So, excuse me, acknowledging their role, known position, or adding some local relevance. But there was a noticeable gap between what campaigners thought made an action more effective and what they said they actually did. So we can see here, that while a high proportion of people are bringing in a specific call to action, it's much lower for some of the others. We were heartened, though, to see only a handful had experimented with faking personalization with AI messages. There was only a handful had experimented with this. So email to targets could be better. For example, only 60% said they always make sure that the email to the target has a clear call to action. Only 60% tailor the message to the target sometimes, and only 9% always. And only 14% were confident that at least half the supporter messages to target were personalised in some way. 28% didn't know, suggesting that it isn't something that people are necessarily prioritising or measuring. So we asked about the barriers, if people knew what they needed to be doing and acknowledged they weren't doing it. And interestingly, the technology wasn't mentioned as one of the top issues. People were much more likely to mention a lack of skills, a lack of time to set up complex actions or do the research they needed, or pressure to just get something out, which might also explain the default to MPs as a campaign target that feels like it's always relevant. There's also there just a flag, there's some kind of remaining anxiety about what supporters might do if we allowed them to express themselves. So I'm really grateful to the survey respondent who put this very clearly alongside a plea to not reveal their name or organisation, which we will of course honour, that this is what the responses really were saying in so many words. We know we are not always doing the best actions we can, and sometimes we do email to target actions, particularly email to MP, because it is the default. It can take a lot of internal bureaucracy to get an action off the ground, and sometimes doing what we've always done, despite the lack of impact to the other end, is just the easiest option. Now, this might seem quite an odd thing for me to flag up, working for a supplier of email to target software, but we are really invested in making sure this powerful and important tactic remains powerful and effective, and supporting the sector to make the most of it. And one really specific but important additional point, many actions could be working a lot harder. We were quite surprised to see when we did the inbox analysis, very few of the organisation whose emails we tracked sent any chasers to people who hadn't taken the action. So obviously our fake campaigner who'd signed up to all these email lists wasn't taking the actions. Only 14% of organisations sent any reminders after an initial action request. So let's be honest, we all delete emails unread from organisations that we do care about. So this seems like a pretty obvious way to boost participation in your actions and make the most of the time and effort that go into creating an action is, if people don't respond, ask again. This is potentially a very easy win, though of course it depends on you having data flows in place so that you know who's taken your actions and you know who to nudge. So there's lots more in the report, but here's what we think is the headline for the sector. Email to target is valuable. We need to use it well and create better email to target actions, and maybe fewer of them, or maybe with a more diverse range of targets. Though volume does still matter, it's no longer enough just to generate big numbers. We think it's time to reconsider email to target and embrace a future where targets actually are distinguishing between messages from real supporters and automatically generated template messages or fake variety generated via AI. If AI has the potential to bring in enormous quantity, our route has to go towards quality and authenticity. And the answer is supporting supporters to speak up about issues they care about, enabling them to send good, interesting, and well-informed messages, and connecting them with the right power holders at the right time. And the implication of that is we need to be offering supporters a wider variety of interesting other ways to engage with our causes. So rather than offering perhaps superficial opportunities to contact targets, we need to deepen and develop supporter relationships by engaging interactive content that deepens their understanding and connections with the issue. Naturally, we're thinking pretty hard about the implications of all of this and how we can make sure that our tool set is providing what campaigners and fundraisers need. There are some ideas in the report, and we'll be going into more detail in our next Impact Stack update webinar in a few weeks. Sign up via the link, which I think Florian's going to be posting now in the chat, if you would like to know more about what we will specifically be doing. There's a lot of rich material in the report, including lots of quotes from the survey responses and interviews, which I can't possibly do justice to in a short presentation. So watch your inbox tomorrow. We'll be emailing it out to everybody who signed up for this event. So a huge thank you once again to everybody who responded to the survey and to the MP and their staff who shared their time and insights so generously and gave us such an amazing insight into what it's like to be on the receiving end of a campaign. So happy. I think we've got time for a couple of questions. Let me just turn my screen share down.
Jess. Please do. Oh, we've got a few more questions coming in. So we're going to start off with a question from Jason. So a really specific but important point here. So Jason's saying we've seen an increase in government ministers, especially those with Secretary of State email addresses, using contact forms instead of email addresses, which can make contacting more harder and obviously impacts or could impact supporter engagement. Is it something picked up by More Onion? If yes, any suggestions?
That's a really interesting question. I think for interacting with contact forms is something that we need to look at. I don't have a quick answer for that, but it's definitely something to log and something perhaps to bring into the better message to target actions discussion in the second session, because obviously how do we get our message to a target when the mechanisms are changing is a really important point to raise. But I don't have an easy answer to that one straight away. But thank you, Jason. It's exactly the kind of thing we want to talk about today.
So just a quick practical one about the time frame of the survey and when it was dealt. And someone was asking specifically if the impact, if there were more ETTs last year because of the general election, was it an anomalous year?
It's a really good question. So the survey went out in June, late June through to beginning of August, and we asked for what people had done in the last 12 months. So that would catch, I suppose, people's welcome to new MP type action, but it wouldn't catch the kind of general election itself. We actually, when we did the inbox analysis, we initially did a pass and we realized that we'd just chosen a really bad time, that June, July, it kind of moved into the summer period, which is why we actually pushed it longer to look at actions, because we wanted a longer period and get a bit more of a representative sample. But there's no question that obviously, it's a small sample and obviously it's going to be skewed by certain things. So for example, there were, I think it was something like 11 different email to MP actions about benefit cuts, because obviously that was just a really live issue in the period that we were looking at. That's obviously interesting because obviously 11 actions is enough to kind of skew the figures a little bit. But it's also interesting to think, gosh, from the NMP's point of view, we've got 11 different organisations, and among, those are just the ones that we saw, encouraging their supporters to write about an aspect of essentially the same issue. And so possibly there's more scope for coalition working on these things, was the other thing that it flagged up for me.
Thanks, Jess.
Sorry, I wandered off the point a bit.
We've got lots coming in now. There's quite a few on here that I know are answered in the report directly. So I'm just going to pick up two more and then we'll move on to our next. So one is kind of what happens next. So did you look into it all? So when you've got your email through, that sort of consistent follow up, the building of the relationship with the MP, the response, and maybe the increasing sort of standardization of responses from MPs that may kill engagement.
I think that the idea of having some kind of tool that would connect both ends has been floating around for quite a while for those of us who've been talking about this stuff for 20 years. I think part of the issue obviously is an investment from the other end. There needs to be buy-in from the target end and the and the campaigner end to create something that would close that loop. What I thought was quite encouraging in that feels more possible than it was 10 years ago, because there's a much higher level of standardization. Certainly if we're talking about MPs, there's a much higher level of standardization in terms of the infrastructure they're using. Everyone we spoke to uses caseworker.mp, whatever it's called. And, while there were differences between the different offices, they're all using the same parliamentary servers. 20 years ago, they were all setting up their own email infrastructure. That has really changed. And also there was a heartening level of acceptance and even enthusiasm for constituent contact, which I'm not sure we'd have seen, maybe 15 years ago. A lot of MPs were still like, this isn't real contact from, and I'm sure there are still MPs who feel that way about some campaigns, but it felt like that this was not really controversial any longer. It was broadly accepted. And so it feels like systems like, we would love to look at something like a pledge engine. Do you know what I mean? Something that would allow MPs to say, yes, I'm on board with this, and make that public, and for that to be a system that would be usable by both ends. But yeah, these are all the things that we want to talk about in the discussion
Great.
groups.
Thank you. And some people have asked for some examples. There's great case studies again in the report. Thank you so much for all these questions. Just to end, one from Beth, are emails more effective than postcards?
I'm going to pass that one to Stefan because there's some interesting stuff that came through in the interviews with targets, and of course the answer is it depends on what you are trying to achieve. So
Thank you.
I
Thanks
will
so
I,
much,
I will
Jess.
look at the Q&A and I'll answer everything I can while the others are speaking if I'm able.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So I'm now going to hand over to Stefan Beckerton-Moore, Campaigns and Mobilisation Manager at the Alzheimer's Society. Stefan spent over a decade working with politicians before moving across to lead the campaigns team at Cats Protection before then joining Alzheimer's Society. So in this presentation, he's going to draw on his experience from both sides of the inbox. That sounds like a good TV show, to share insights into how politicians' offices have had to adjust to deal with mass email campaigns. Over to you, Stefan. Thanks very much.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Katie. I'm hoping my slides are appearing for you. Uh,
Yep.
yes, brilliant. Thank you very much. And first of all, we're very much grateful for that introduction, Katie. And I wanted to start with a huge thanks to Jess and More Onion for inviting me along to speak today. This is a really great topic to be discussing. And the work that they have put into this report is brilliant. So when you receive it tomorrow, please make time to look through it and think about your own approaches and what you could do differently in response to it, because it is a really good piece of research. So just on my own background, as Katie mentioned, I was working for politicians before moving to the charity sector. And primarily that was MPs. I will caveat that in a minute around my experience. But I worked in various roles for a shadow minister. So there was that extent. I had the experience of being lobbied, trying to get us to change position on various elements, and also within the constituency office. And part of what I worked on with my office manager at the time was bringing in a new system to deal with the huge amount of emails, that caseworker.mp system that Jess referenced. And I'll touch upon that slightly, but I'm also leading the MPs and mobilisation section later, so we'll save some of it for that as well. Before I get into things, though, I wanted to start with a word of caution. With that point that yes, my experience is working for MPs primarily, and I know we have lots of people here who will be targeting different groups and different elected officials. So hopefully there are some common threads, and I will attempt to avoid just saying MPs all the time, but that is where a lot of my experience comes from. And those common threads, I think, are really useful in the way More Onion have pulled them out in the report. So as much as Jess says it's got that focus, there is lots of common points that I think are really useful. The second thing I wanted to caveat everything with is that I think it's important you take everything that I say and any individual source on this says about campaigns with a bit of a pinch of salt. It's really useful, of course, to take points from individual sources. However, it's quite hard for us to measure the impact of a campaign and an email to target action. And we need to just take on board what's said, but actually, when we're talking about politicians and targets generally, there is a huge difference in opinion, and everyone is influenced differently. We call them targets. Of course, there is individuals, there is offices behind this that will impact things massively. So do your own testing on this, and I'm sure something that one MP's office or one target's office would say may not always resonate exactly with your experience. But I've heard that often said that we've heard this campaign doesn't work because of X, Y, and Z, but it is often relying on a single source. But as I've said, the report that More Onion have pulled together has pulled together a lot of those common threads. So it is really useful to consider that in that light. But with that in mind, that I'm saying politicians, whoever you're targeting, these are individuals, I did just want to start by just thinking about what we expect of politicians. Like anyone, influenced by a complex variety of factors, empathy towards particular campaigns, personal interests. Realistically, are we expecting every target to care about every issue? job security is potentially having an impact there. Are you in a marginal seat? And this opportunity to communicate with your constituents might be really, really useful and valued. And role may have an impact as well. For example, if they're a minister, there may or may not be things that they can and can't do in response to email to target campaigning. But we do have these huge demands from politicians. We expect a lot, and I think the public we know there is this decreasing trust in politics. And I think it's important to consider, do we have a role to consider as part of that? Of course, some people will work directly in the sort of democracy space, but for the rest of us running email to target campaigns, what is the impact when we're talking about running these campaigns and how we talk about them to our supporters? Looking for a quick search in terms of what people say about contacting their MP, there is a lot of criticism. And I know I've seen this in the inbox where people will come back and say, oh, I always get a generic response from my MP, or they take forever to respond. When we know the reality is we've asked them to send a generic email. Would we expect anything different in a sense? But there are these demands. There's this huge critiques of politicians in how they respond, and MPs in particular do have this additional role that they are expected to communicate back with their constituents, which we play into. We use that as a way to get our campaign messages across. But thinking about this and how we apply email to target is really important in terms of what people's perceptions are of their politicians as well, and politics generally. And there's a really great video on this from Kirsty McNeil MP, who, if you don't follow on LinkedIn, I would advise you to do so, because previously working in the campaign space and now an MP, she's putting out some really useful content on this. And one of the things she talks about, she's done a video, which I'm sure we can find a way to put in the chat somehow, talks about how they deal with correspondence that's coming in, because there is a lot. There is a huge amount of inbound communication for politicians and their offices to deal with. And we are just part of that. They have that political aspect. They're getting the briefings, reports, all of these types of content coming through, as well as that local angle that we're playing into, that MPs in particular are expected to respond to their constituents. But within that, MPs have taken on this role as a bit of an emergency service, in a sense. You're also, when you're sending in your policy casework or campaign messages, at the same time, that office is trying to deal with incredibly urgent casework. People suddenly finding themselves made homeless, immigration casework is all coming in as well via phone and email. And in a sense, we are competing for resource with that. And I think that's a really important consideration in terms of how we apply this, that yes, they should be responding, of course, they and many of them will want to, as Jess has said. But there's a lot going on there. And realistically, our targets have limited time and staffing capacity in the case of MPs and many other targets to deal with these requests. So that is going to impact how they're dealt with, and we can follow up, we can chase, etc. But realistically, we are in this complex environment. And just from the Institute for Government there, in terms of the actual funding for MPs, officers and staff, when I started working for an MP, we were at this point where the budget was for 3.5 members of staff. And there is a huge amount to be dealing with. You just got to think about all the admin of a politician's life and organising everything they're meant to be at, preparing for debates, whatever else is going on in Parliament, as well as dealing with everything in the constituency. Has increased, but I would argue there is still a huge amount compared to what is being asked and what is expected from the public, from their representatives. So with that in mind, MPs and other targets, I'm sure, who are dealing with this have had to adjust quite dramatically to deal with this amount of communication that's coming in. The rise of email to target, and that we've all got much better at converting our supporters to take these, as was referenced, normally higher bar actions, has had a knock-on impact in terms of how this is dealt with. And thinking back to the first MP I worked with, sort of an internship, my memory of how they communicated and would send responses back at this time, and this was sort of at the start of when this was all happening, around email to target becoming much bigger. They would come back on a non-sitting Friday when there wasn't anything going on in Parliament, and there would be a lot of hand-signed letters going out and checking for typos as well, which I'm sure was a frustration for caseworkers. But they would be making sure that this was a very important piece of communication. They saw it was going out. It became much harder to do that with email to targets, campaigning becoming a bigger thing. And we have had to adjust to that on the political side from that experience. And the second MP I worked for, essentially casework when I started there was dealt with by filing cabinets. People would write in, they would get a file, and within that, their campaign letter or urgent casework, whatever it was, would go in there and be manually assigned to someone. This became harder and harder to adjust to, and there wasn't ever really any guidance or step through for politicians' office in how to do this, which is Jess's point, really interesting about what could make this work better. And I'm going to talk more about this in the MPs and mobilisation section because I'm aware it's quite relevant to MPs, but perhaps not other targets. But because of the scale of communication, these systems like caseworker.mp came in where messages could be sent on, taken out of the inbox, assigned to someone, and responses sent. And essentially, for a campaign message, they'll all be sent on, they will be tagged, and then a button will be clicked to send a response. And this, of course, has changed that dynamic massively. And I think the expectation there in terms of contacting an MP or a target generally is that you're going to get a proper response. But realistically, the scale of this makes it very difficult for it to be dealt with. And there are differences that come out in the report in terms of how these are dealt with. Really interesting. Again, make sure you go and read that report. But on the whole, people have had to adjust to these things, and sort of standardized responses are going to be part of it. Not everyone can have a specific view on a specific campaign, and it would just take all of their time to attempt to do so realistically. Now, I guess the question going back to what's it like to be a campaign target, and as I've tried to stress a little there, while I'm not being the campaign target, realistically, those messages were landing with someone like me to process. So in terms of what your target, your actual target that you are targeting, an MP or whoever, what they might think of the individual campaign message you've sent is perhaps nothing. They may not have even seen it. They may not be able to review every piece of thousands of emails that are dropping in every couple of weeks. So the experience for them is perhaps different. And in the case of MPs, where it has become much more difficult to manage that level of correspondence, the response has been that MPs have a second email inbox because they cannot use their own inbox. So there may be a general annoyance. And I think that's what you get a lot of the time in terms of asking people around this is there is this extent of frustration around this, that it has become difficult to deal with and they want to communicate back, but it has become very hard. So I guess the main thing with this for me that I wanted to stress is that actually when you're sending your email to target, that's not the end of the journey. You need to be thinking about how that message actually gets across, what impact it's going to have. I think email to target still has a very valid place. It can be used. I've experienced and found ways for it to be effective. But if it's used generically, it can be a challenge. And with that in mind, and drawing very heavily on Jess's work and Moranyan's work on this report, the question I sort of come to with this is there a way for us as campaign organisations and campaigners to keep email to targets relevant? And Jess touched upon some of these, and I just wanted to pull them out and stress a little more why I think they are important for us to consider. And I've put these under three sort of key categories for us as organisations to start thinking about. Firstly, in terms of planning, when we're thinking about our campaign strategy, how is email to target actually fitting in there? Is it just easily slotting in because it's something we know how to do, or can we use it in a way that is strategically beneficial? Process, thinking about the technology we've got, what can we do with that, and delivery, how those messages that are actually landing. So within that point about planning in your campaign strategy, there's things that Jess touched upon there. A clear call to action, and this is probably one of my favorite points that comes out of this, because this really made me think back to reading through messages, trying to work out what you're actually asking, what is it you want us to do. And there's some great responses in this report around this about how people are saying, MPs officers, I think it was saying, just a sigh when you go a huge block of text trying to work out what's being asked. And there's this element, I think sometimes we think the office will want something very policy heavy, but realistically you're dealing with people with limited time. And we think about this so much with communicating with our supporters about how we optimize things, how we get the message across. And sometimes from the experience on the other side, I'd say that hasn't been thought through as much when the message to the target is landing. If you want them to do something, if there's a specific event or an early day motion that you want signed, put it high up in the email, put it in the subject line, make it very clear. And that goes to that clear communication point as well. Don't make it difficult to understand. Yes, at some point, if you get through those steps and you've built that relationship with the target, you can get to the point where you're discussing detailed policy, but for some poor MP member of staff trying to unpick what you're actually asking, make it clear if you can. Timeliness is a really interesting one, and there's a good bit of feedback in the report about this, about, right, if it's come in when there's a debate, there's something relevant going on, you're going to get a decent response. We're going to think through this. If it is just fitting into, I guess, perhaps your own email schedule, there may be an issue there that you might not be necessarily applying this at the right time. In terms of the process and technology, tailoring is just mentioned, and there's again, Kirsty McNeil made a very good point about this that Jess highlighted with me. If you are getting messages through to say a minister, are you thinking about tailoring that message, that email to target, to say something that they can actually do? And this maybe reflect on that early day motion point. While I was working for a shadow minister, that made it very easy for us to respond, because we could say, thank you for your email about this early day motion. Unfortunately, as a shadow minister, I can't sign these, but thank you. And I do also remember having to quickly adjust an email to target where we were asking people to write to the minister, and then suddenly going, of course, we cannot ask the minister to write to the minister. So make sure that it is working. Personalization is a really great one as well. Comes up a lot, and I think this is seen as a bit of the gold standard. Yes, if there is a heartfelt message where somebody is actually impacted, it is going to be dealt with very differently.
Stefan,
On
we've
the
got
other
about a
side
minute
of that,
left.
sorry.
We've got about a minute left just to fit in the next
Okay, brilliant.
presentation.
Thanks.
Thank
Yes,
you.
just on that personalization point, the one caveat with that is that if you are doing that, make sure it is done aware. I do remember somewhere it was done in a more generic way, and it was dealt with in the same way as other casework. And with that, making sure it's locally relevant. And on delivery, thinking about volume, yes, but that's not the only part of it. It can be seen as a negative. It makes it seem very generic, and it's obviously an easy metric for us to deliver. And the other communication methods is really interesting point, because it comes through in terms of postcards, but also how else are you getting your messages across? Really great points in the report around this and some examples. And I'm hoping through these breakout sessions we can explore some of this further. So thank you very much for that. For that. And if there's any questions, happy to answer them in the chat.
Thanks so much, Stefan. We'll try and take a couple of questions that have come in. So the first one is, I mean, you've given lots of practical advice here, but particularly from maybe an organisational point of view, how can we encourage our supporters who are feeling really disillusioned and disengaged with contacting their MPs? What could we do?
Yes, I guess a part of that is going back and showing the impact. And now, if that, of course, goes back to your planning and making sure that they are actually having an impact, so you can genuinely communicate that back. And I think there is ways to do that. And if you are managing to actually plan an email to target that works, your supporters will potentially see the direct impact of that. They will get the responses back, and you will be able to demonstrate through that feedback loop that what is happening as a result.
Thanks, Stefan. And then I guess in a sort of related way, there's that risk potentially within the personalization of an email that you then can't control the content that's going in. And there's someone on the questions that has a specific example where the content was unsavory in some way, and actually the feedback was this isn't doing anything for your charity's reputation. Is there anything we can do around that risk, or is just the partnership so important, or that personalization so important we have to grin and bear it?
Yeah, there is going to be a risk with personalization. I agree. And I think we do need to be slightly cautious in terms of how it's applied, because that volume point, that is often what we're chasing. It's such an easy metric for us to measure that we will try and make personalization as easy as possible. And I'd say there is the risk the other side, that there will be very generic points put in that really aren't adding to anything as well. So making sure there is that guidance. You are taking a risk, I think, with personalization. There is no getting away from that. That said, where I've, I guess, seen it most effectively, when it has been one or two people contacting, perhaps, and there has clearly been working with an organisation and that individual campaigner or supporter, and they've worked to contact and actually built that relationship much more.
Brilliant, thank you. And the last one, someone's asked about the fact that some MPs have got a line of, well, we don't respond to third-party emails. Can they do that? Is that right?
Yes, there's nothing, I guess, to stop them. There is this perception that they should be dealing with it, and realistically, we know, frankly, some of them can't because of the capacity. And it's an interesting space, because some of this criticism will come back to the point that actually there is a niche group that will take these actions, and somebody has a propensity to take email to target actions, often will do so for other organizations as well. And I do remember individuals with sort of 200 cases, etc. They were clicking every button and it felt very meaningless, I think, to the other side. So some will take that view. It's obviously up to them how they manage their office. These are individual organizations you're contacting in a sense.
Great, thanks, Stefan. And I know that's dealt with in the report as well in terms of how the email presents itself when it arrives in the inbox. Thank you so much, Stefan. We're going to move on now to our third speaker. And again, we'll try and pick up the unanswered questions in the chat if we can. So I'd really pleased to introduce Isabella Burton to you this morning. Bella is the Digital Campaigns Officer with Housing and Homelessness Campaigners Shelter, and she'll be sharing on an example of an email to target action which illustrates some really interesting ways to implement the good practices we've been talking about and the impact that follows. So over to you, Bella. Thank you.
Nice one. Thanks, Katie. And yeah, thanks for having me. And yeah, hope everyone's doing well. So yeah, I'm going to present a bit of a case study on an action we ran in October 2024 for the Renters' Rights Bill. This is very kind of England centric, just because we are this case study is focusing on a bill kind of impacting England in specifics, but yeah, hopefully people find it useful. And I will be talking about influencing MPs. So yeah, cutting through the noise with an email to target, and we ran like a choice-based action with the help from More Onion with the build. So yeah, just a quick intro to myself and the Renters' Rights Bill. So the Renters' Rights Bill is like a once-in-a-generation shake-up and improvement of our renting system. And we've been fighting to make sure this legislation is as strong as possible for 11 million renters across England. Unlike many countries across Europe, England has awful rights for renters. Like we can be evicted for no reason at any point. We can be discriminated against for claiming benefits or renting if we have kids. And we have no cap to how much our rents can be increased in our tenancies or outside of. So the Renters' Rights Bill will address some of this, but not everything. But yeah, this has been part of a long campaign, years in the making. I mean, this was previously the Renters Reform Bill under the Conservative government, and now Labour are kind of passing their own version of the bill. And yeah, so like I said, this action that I'm going to be talking about took place in October, and it was the first debate of Labour's new bill in Parliament. And just a bit about me, I'm the Digital Campaigns Officer at Shelter, leading supportive mobilisation for our renting campaign. And there's a picture of some of us from a little photo shoot we did recently. This is a bill campaign, as I mentioned, and I guess we're kind of lucky in that sense that a lot of moments are somewhat predefined as important. And I've got a little screenshot of something from our strategy about looking at all the kind of some of the moments from a bill campaign. However, you can kind of choose to amplify or harness these moments. So this could look like shaping debates, chances to table amendments, influencing across the House of Commons or the House of Lords. And for this action, we decided one of the first major debates, which was second reading, was a good place to kind of bring renters' stories in and experiences to the forefront. It would be an important debate. It's the first of many, but it's important to like strike the right tone and shape the narrative like right from the start. And it would also give, obviously there's a lot of new MPs and this was like one of the first bills they introduced. It would give new MPs a chance to show where they stand and a chance to hear from their constituents on why this is so important to them. So yeah, I guess it's it's kind of gives you the question like, what story are you telling with your actions across the bill process or across your campaign timeline, and like zooming out and maybe identifying as best as you can like how you want to kind of thread that story and how your actions support that. And so yeah, it's just good to have in mind as well, looking at this timeline of like when to send the action for a chosen moment and to stagger it, like when those, for example, emails are going to land in your target's inbox. For example, for this action, we focused on MPs, but we focused specifically on MPs with high renters percentage, like a lot of renters in their constituency. And yeah, we focused on renters' experiences and stats and stories tied to that area as well. So as you can tell, I'm not a graphic designer, but I thought hopefully this may demonstrate and tap into a bit of what Jess and Stefan have said. The problem that we identified, especially with the new government, was a sea of email to targets. Obviously, from our own organisation and from Shelter during the government, like the election campaign. So yeah, we identified that MPs were being targeted with lots of asks. And there's also waning interest from supporters as well, maybe feeling like actions were like very automated. Maybe they were really quick, but like they weren't very customizable. And also maybe they weren't seeing impact, which was impacting supporters want to do them. So we had a need to cut through and influence the debate, the second reading debate, and to demonstrate the importance of the Renters' Rights Act and renters' rights in general. So our solution was we wanted to create an action that focused on quality over quantity and engagement over volume. So we decided to focus on having kind of a customizable action with the choice element right at the start. That included localized stats, stories from renters taking the action or campaigners taking the action, and a tangible, clear ask that was doable for the targets, also trackable for us. And we included personalized messages that stood out. And yeah, we had engaging moments, or tried to create engaging moments for the user and the target throughout the experiences. So we asked people to share their story. We included local stats and we said, use this in the debate. And supporters themselves, I can show you in a minute, could select the topic that was most important to them. So this is what we did. So we, as I mentioned, we had a choice-based action to shape the debate and platform renter stories. So we worked with Jess and More Onion to build this action, and we had a landing page. So this is the landing page that you can see with 4 options of what campaigners wanted to email their MP about. So we wanted to kind of give people this choice to share what was like important to them. So we've got ending discrimination in renting, an end to unfair rent increases, security for renters, and then all of the above. So each page that you could click on one of these, each page would have different copy hinging on the topic, different policy briefing, and each stat and email was also different depending on the journey that you took. But all of them would also include the others in there, in the briefings and things, but it just would center maybe this one, this topic first. And then, like I mentioned, each person had a chance to share their story. So there were some worries that people would drop off at this landing page, or it'd be too high bar, or that everyone would tick all of the above option. So yeah, those were just some slight worries that some folks had in the organization. But yeah, I can kind of touch on that later, that both proved to be a non-issue, which was great. So yeah, I guess this is kind of a bit more of what we wanted to create, and kind of like creating basically a positive kind of feedback cycle for the target and for our campaigner. So yeah, like I said, we focused on high renting constituencies. We gave campaigners an opportunity to engage in something personalized and share their experience to actually shape a debate. And obviously the debates are broadcast as well. And then the MP is engaged by personalization and a tangible ask and stats. And they share that into the debate, and we feed that back to supporters. And also, I guess, like kind of also linking to what Stefan mentioned, like viewing maybe targets in a different way. Like we wanted to give MPs something they could use, and therefore supporters could see impact. But often we're asking a lot of our targets, which is obviously right. But if we framed it as like helping new MPs by giving them useful information, like especially for new MPs, this could land more favorably. It helps build that relationship and maybe helps them see these emails or the supporter or Shelter in a kind of more collaborative light. So just a little bit on how we like pushed it out. We made sure this was like a really timely and urgent action. Our supporters tend to respond best to that. And similar to our supporters, our targets respond best to timely and tangible asks. We ran this for a short time, only 1 week. And we made sure that the timing was very tight and that plenty of emails were staggered, and we had time to they had time to land in people's inboxes, with the last one coming a day before the debate. So there'd be ideally not at the top, but maybe near the top of MPs' inboxes. So yeah, I think it's just great to think about timing when you're kind of doing this. We also ran some paid ads in high percentage renting constituencies and targeted these more within our email list as well, with more urgent messaging and kind of more segmentation. Yeah, so it gave people the chance to kind of demonstrate what was important to them, but while also mixing up kind of the emails in MPs' inboxes. And now I'll just quickly take you through some of the visuals of the action and how we set it up. So like I said, this was like the landing page, and it had some intro copy and 4 choices. And we also had an accordion, and we really like accordions just because they obviously give a lot of ability to include lots of info while keeping kind of pages shorter. I'll probably go through these next ones more quickly, and you can see the presentation in the end if you're interested in like the difference in the pages. But this was our discrimination in renting option. This was our unfair rent increases option. This was our security option. And finally, this was our like more indecisive, all of the above option. And I'm just showing you a little bit about how we used the form and like to help personalize the email that was getting sent to the target. So for the user on the left, they could include an I am a private renter option, which if clicked yes, would be in the email towards the start. Then on the right, in the message, we included the city or like area in the subject line and the topic chosen, and then the location in the first line again. So there was a lot of variation in these emails, and yeah, kind of including the topic and the ask kind of in quite a concise way, like right at the top. So yeah, I can go through like the results of the action. I mean, like I mentioned, we were worried there would be a drop off or like conversion, but it performed actually above our average. And we also made sure to include info on the action in the email launch, so people knew what to expect. So yeah, I won't take you through all of these, but it's interesting to maybe note that 45% of people opted for the affordability option. So it also gave us clear indication of like what people are interested in as well, which is useful for our comms ongoing. But yeah, results were really tangible. We got 10 mentions in Parliament. We got a story from the action read out by Florence Eshalomi in the picture on the right at the debate, and positive feedback as well from MPs, and also just getting rent caps or rent stabilisation onto the agenda as well. Basically, really massively helped shape the debate. And then a big part of this is feeding this back and demonstrating impact. So we didn't want people to feel like they were emailing into the void. So this action helped recruit new supporters where they could actually see the impact they had. So we demonstrated this with clips on social media, like videos of MPs mentioning us or mentioning their stories, with an email, obviously at the end, with social posts. So making sure that campaigners knew exactly the benefit they had.
Isabella, I think we're going to have to draw things to a close now, but it
Right.
looks like you are on time and on schedule. So thank you so much. We've got literally a couple of minutes of questions, and there's a couple that have come up that are really related about data, but just to sort of feedback, it's so encouraging to see the sort of ripple effect of how not just that action but the data that you were collecting has had that wider impact on the organisation. So the question is particularly around how easy it was to find localised data to tailor your action, and also when that localised data doesn't necessarily overlap with constituency areas and other sort of categories that we create.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we are quite lucky at Shelter. We have obviously we're quite a large organization. We have a research team, and we also had a lot of like data from, I think, the general election, which was split by constituency. But we obviously do find, and we have included ones that don't map on exactly. But if it's like a large city in a constituency or a large area, in a constituency, it will still be relevant and of interest that we found. And I think just having that more localized approach, even if it doesn't map them perfectly, is still engaging. I think for targets, it's better than potentially going, I think, like completely nationwide, for example. I think it has a bit more of a pull, even if it's not perfect.
Brilliant, really helpful. There's a specific question from Portia about Renters' Rights Bill, which I'm sure you can answer as well. But just to wrap us up for the webinar, thanks so much again, Isabella, and tell you what's going to happen next.